Hello and welcome to the latest Sharp Microsoft Connected event. It's a great pleasure to have you with us. As we move back to the office, we are entering a new environment, and today's theme is all about agile working in the new normal. My name is Chris Parker and I'm the European Product Manager for Visual Solutions at Sharp Electronics in Europe. And indeed, we have many locations from around Europe joining today, as well as the UK and even across the Atlantic, USA, America. Welcome to you all. This is primarily a digital event, but it's also a little bit hybrid because we have some keynote speakers in the Sharp London office, of course, all safely socially distanced, and they'll be giving us a couple of very good keynote presentations. As I mentioned, we have a pan-European audience, and maybe English is not your first or natural language. With Teams live events, we have this opportunity to use live AI, artificial intelligence, translations, and that's through the live captions, subtitles on the app dashboard. So there's a little logo, maybe a CC. Make sure that you see that and that is activated and that you have subtitles on. And then there's a further display setting where you can choose the target language. So I think we are supporting 6 or 7 other languages which are automatically translated into subtitles. So do make sure that you use that feature. If English is not your first language, you'll get the most out of this event. So welcome aboard, and at this point it's my great privilege to welcome Jason Court as our first keynote speaker. Jason is the European Director of Marketing and Product Planning at Sharp Electronics Europe. And Jason, the floor is all yours.
Chris, fantastic. So thanks for the introduction. Sadly, COVID-19 continues to have a big presence in all of our lives, and clearly will have a lasting impact both economically and socially on the world and on ourselves. And so what I'd like to do in terms of this keynote is really share some insights with you as to how Sharp is adapting our offering strategy in light of the new normal. So of course, the natural place to start is with our customers and look at the experience that our customers are going through now and that they will go through in the future. And undoubtedly, it's very much about survival, keeping the lights on. Then at some point, as we start to progress out of the COVID-19 situation, businesses will look to recover as they stabilise the situation, stabilise their business, and then ultimately beyond that, actually start to make plans and grow their businesses back. Of course, going through this experience, there are a whole load of lessons that businesses are learning, and there'll be lessons that actually will create new guiding principles as they make this journey. Some of those principles I've just highlighted here. So, businesses will need to be safe financially. So that means that companies will look to move more from a CapEx to an OpEx based model when it comes to making investments for their organizations. Safe employees. This is a really interesting one because there's the physical safety, the physical health safety of being in the office, social distancing has just been mentioned. But there's also the mental well-being of our employees as well. And one of the positives of COVID-19 has been to demonstrate that actually organizations can let their employees work from home on a regular basis, and actually the organisation still functions and the work still gets done and people are productive. And the flip side to that is that employees are discovering a whole new work-life balance. So it really is a win-win situation there. If we then move on to digital safety, really important. Security, the bad actors in the world have continued to be bad actors and actually take even more advantage maybe of vulnerable businesses through these terrible times. So security has not gone away and it will continue to be very high on the agenda. Reputation, that's an interesting one, and again through the COVID period already, maybe some reputations have been made, but certainly reputations have been damaged or lost. And certainly in the UK, for instance, there's a company called Boohoo, whose suppliers have now been exposed, if you like, in terms of not having great practices for their own employees, and Boohoo have lost businesses as a result of that. So then really moving on and looking at the environment. With the whole lockdown situation, clearly people haven't travelled, and in not travelling, we're not generating the vast amounts of CO2 that all of us have contributed towards. And we've seen quite a rapid and positive change to the environment around us. I'm sure we've all seen the pictures. And so, you know, do we want to go back to the old environment, or do actually we want to kind of preserve some of that really positive changes that we've made and build on that for the future? So some really important questions and guidelines as our customers move forward through survival, recovery and growth. So the question for Sharp really is, you know, what difference does this make for our strategy? So looking at our offering strategy pre-COVID, it was built very much around some key tenets of data, remote monitoring and management, technology as a service, and security, and probably many of you are familiar or becoming familiar with those terms, and applying them to creating solutions which are bundles of people, process, technology, whether that's for print solutions, collaboration solutions, home working, or even IT solutions, you know, including products from Dynabook, for instance, which is now part of the Sharp family. So when we look at that strategy post-COVID, actually, in terms of the strategy itself, little has changed and little needs to change. However, the factors or the trends that were driving that particular strategy have really accelerated. So what that means for Sharp is that we need to accelerate our strategy as well, because collaboration has moved on very rapidly. You know, it's a common way of working now every single day. People are printing less, so again, you know, we need to augment that print business more rapidly. And of course, maybe a change in emphasis. So home working maybe wasn't quite such a high priority, whereas now it is a much higher priority for our customers and therefore for us. So the key customer value drivers are what guide us as we build those products and services. And I'll just point to maybe a couple of those on the screen here. So remote monitoring and management, really relevant to today, even more so, because not only does it maximize the availability of the products and the services, but the remote element and the remote management is all about minimizing the number of site visits that an engineer, for instance, might have to make to that customer. And again, we all know that customers now, we're all the same, are looking to minimize third-party visits to our premises or even our home environments, which are now our home offices as well. The second one I'd call out quickly is the online experience. So not just the e-commerce aspects, but actually how customers will now want to manage the vendor relationships differently, and maybe use collaboration tools and video conferencing for those traditional sort of sales meetings. Which really kind of takes me on to the third aspect of the keynote, which is to focus on collaboration for the new normal, and call out some of the key points around agile working, the collaboration and productivity that comes all with that meeting experience. So when we look at agility, number of key points there, but I would focus interestingly on security as well, because often when we think about security, it's about securing our data. But with video conferencing, you know, some of the platforms, I think there was one in particular that had quite a number of security vulnerabilities exposed through the high usage of its platform. And that's not about content, but that's about dialogue and confidential conversations that are exposed. If we look at collaboration, you know, that's really about obviously bringing people together, but now we're bringing them together in a different way, because it's no longer 20 people in one large work group session with a couple of people dialing in remotely. Actually, that room for 20 people is now a room for 4 people. Everyone else is joining remotely, either from their home or actually from the same office, but they're dialing in remotely. And therefore we need to provide the right tools that give that kind of in-meeting experience, but in that digital environment. One other interesting aspect is around helping people, particularly those joining remotely from the home office, stay focused and stay energized, which brings us back to the quality of the audio video experience and the ability for people to participate actively and easily and be heard in those meetings, and also to keep energized in terms of the environment that they're sitting in and the air that they're breathing. And then finally, we need to keep people productive. That fast start, walk in, plug in, save those 12 minutes that are lost on average, as more important than ever before as we have more and more meetings. And of course, we need a reliable infrastructure actually to keep those meeting connections active and live. So a few thoughts there for you to take away. What I'd now like to do is hand over to Michelle Beaumont, who is the Territory Channel Manager for the modern work practice within Microsoft.
Thank you, and thanks so much for having me again on this session. I remember being on the second one. It's super exciting to see how this event is growing into an all-digital worldwide event. Let me start with Microsoft mission. So at Microsoft, our mission is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And what I would really like to focus on today are those two last words. So for me, achieving more is something else than doing more. It's easy for us to do more. We can sleep less, we can work more hours, we can rest less, have no lunch, and we'll be able to do more. That's not the trick. The trick is how can we actually achieve more. So technology is never the end goal. It should actually help you to meet your own KPIs, something that you aim for within your own company. So let's say for a real estate agent, the goal is never to adopt a piece of technology. It's always having the ability to sell more houses. And I think technology can be a real leverager there. Many workers around the world have spent the last 4 months working remotely and having to adjust to 100% of their meetings now being virtually. And as teams have adjusted to a new reality, many are wondering, when are we going to have to adjust again? Because this is inevitable. Soon we're going to be living in this hybrid world where we're going to have hybrid collaboration. Our research indicates that work will likely be a fluid mix between in-person and remote collaboration. And this means that we somehow have to fix the often disconnect between people that are in a room and that are dialing in virtually. If you look at the amount of meeting rooms that are already capable of bridging this gap, that number is only 15%. So I think there's quite a lot of work to do there, especially now that video has become the new norm. In countries such as the Netherlands, where I live in, 62% of all meetings now are meetings through video in Microsoft Teams. As the pace of business continues to accelerate, workers often feel like they're being pulled into multiple different directions, and as a result, employee performance and their satisfaction are under constant threat. In fact, workers across industries say that a staggering 52% of their time each week, so that's more than half of their productivity, is being spent inefficiently. So that's on inefficient meetings, unnecessary interruptions, calls, emails, searching for information. And through the Microsoft Technology Cloud, you can really make a change here. So the Productivity Cloud delivers two things. One, it's the personal productivity, and then on the other hand, it's the organizational productivity. So we build experience that individuals want to use because they actually help them to achieve more. And then personal productivity is all about improving that individual performance, whereas the organizational productivity that we deliver helps you to drive your organizational growth and increase that efficiency. So how does that all work? Actually, it's quite simple from a user perspective. It starts by providing experiences that people want to use. So for us, concretely, that's the Office stack. So Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. Obviously Teams, but also Windows, and in some regions, even our personal assistant, Cortana. And as people use these different experiences, they produce valuable data. And this data includes content that they create, but also signals that they produce when creating these different forms of content. And what Microsoft 365 does, it takes that data and turns it all into a graph. So it's mapping the relationships between people and information within an organization, and then reasons over that mapping to produce valuable and often unique insights. Then it uses those insights to further enhance the experience that you have as a user. So it's really a virtuous cycle that's self-reinforcing. And as it plays out, it has two really important effects. So one is the experience is getting better and better over time. But then the other one, the graph, which I just talked about, is going to be very rich with a lot of data. And actually, it might be the single most valuable asset as an organization that you have when it comes to driving digital transformation. Now, if you look at actual work throughout our days, we really transition from individual work into work-based or group-based work. And in doing so, we often find ourselves moving between spaces, but also between different devices. As an example, I'm on my Surface laptop right now, but right after this event, I'm going to be on another call. And I can tell you, I'm not going to be in the office. I'm grabbing my mobile phone and I'll be doing the call from outside while walking our dog. So as we also need to consider what different devices are people actually using for what activity. So this could be the personal devices, for the individual workspaces, headsets, IP phones, etc., but also the shared devices in the group workspaces where we have collaboration bar, Teams rooms, and obviously the Windows collaboration display. And while we transition from space to space, and from device to device may sound complex, it's actually made really seamless because of the experience that Teams is delivering you. So it's built on these four different pillars. So one, it has to be a familiar, consistent experience. So no more wondering about how to start a meeting. We just heard we spend about 12 minutes each meeting to get the cables connected and make sure everybody's part of the meeting. No more of that. It has to be very inclusive as well. So the devices need to be intelligent to give everyone the opportunity to participate, but also to be heard. And I think the raise hand function that we launched a couple of months ago in Teams, where you can virtually raise your hand, is one of those features that will really help you to be more inclusive. The third one is the audio quality. So the audio quality that we deliver within Teams, as well as the video quality and the sharing experience, always have to be high. In Teams, we can deliver up to 1080p for video, but that video will scale depending on the bandwidth that you have available. Our most important thing is to ensure that we have crisp audio continuously coming in. And then the last one, and not the less important one, is from an IT perspective. It has to be reliable and it has to be manageable. Now, a couple of other things that can really help when it comes to this inclusion part is the use of ink. So you can use the Windows collaboration display or any device as a matter of fact, that has Teams. You can use the digital whiteboard function where you can scribble your notes and really collaborate. But then in the near future, we'll again go back to this hybrid world and you'll have the whiteboards that are in the room that are being used. And I think you know from experience, being on a call where you're dialed in digitally, you often don't really get what's going on, and that's being written on these whiteboards. So what we can now do is we can use content cameras, and these aren't really specialized cameras. A lot of regular, quote unquote, regular webcams will do perfectly. There's a list available online, and what they do, you can see it here on the left. So this is the whiteboard that's in the room, but what you're seeing here is actually a centerpiece of the information that's on the whiteboard and that's being delivered to you on your team screen. Even if somebody walks in front of the whiteboard, we can use AI technology to look through the person to see what's being written on these whiteboards. Now, I've talked a lot about the technology part, but I think the human part is just as important. At Microsoft in the Netherlands, we have implemented 6 different rituals pre-COVID. And I think the bottom 3 on this list are super relevant nowadays. The first one is we respect focus time. The work that we now do, that we used to do in 8 hours, we can now do in 5. But we have to ensure that we stay mentally fit as well. So we have to ensure that we schedule our focus time each and every day. The second one is we have to make conscious decisions. And I can tell you that every meeting that I'm being invited to that's over 60 minutes, I'm declining or at least challenging to shorten that meeting to 45 minutes. Changing it to 45 minutes helps me to create that little extra gap that I can use to really refresh. So it's 5 minutes that I can use to wrap up the meeting, 5 minutes that I can use to grab some coffee or grab some tea or have some fresh air, and then 5 minutes to be fully prepared for that next meeting. And then the third one is allowing yourself time to refresh. Step outside your office or whatever space you're working from. Do something else. Run some errands. But also use data to see where you can improve. Within Office 365 or Microsoft 365, we have this thing called Microsoft Analytics, My Analytics. So this is your personal view of how what your work patterns are within the last 4 weeks. And as you can see on the slide, it gives you insight on your focus time, your well-being, your collaboration, and your network. And it also gives you tips and pointers on how to improve these different stats. And then something that I'm excited about, which we actually announced last night, is the new Together mode. And what you're seeing here, this is the panel that's going to be on shortly as we wait for this session to be finished. But the Together mode is a new option in the Teams meeting experience that uses AI technology to digitally place participant in a shared background. Right? So this view makes it like you're sitting together in a room, as you can see on this slide. And it's great for things such as brainstorm, roundtable discussions where multiple people are speaking. And early research is showing, and this research is using biosensors that measure brain activity. It's showing that the brain has to put less effort in when participating in a meeting using this Together mode, if you compare it to the more original and more classical grid view. And this suggests, so again, early research, that this Together mode may help you with the feeling of meeting fatigue that some remote workers are currently experiencing. Let me wrap up here with where I started. If you look at implementing technology, do not do it for the sake of just implementing technology. Think about how can it actually help you achieve more. Don't use technology as the end goal. Use it as something that will actually help you as a company to move forward. With that, I would like to thank you a lot. I'm excited to be on the panel. But first, I would like to hand over to Dr. Nigel Oseland, who's the environmental psychologist and workplace strategist. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. So as a psychologist, I'd like to focus on how we feel about returning to the office. And as a workplace strategist, I want to talk a little bit about how office design can help that return. So I'll start with a few questions, and we've posted these up on the chat. We asked, who is loving working from home? We asked, who has cabin fever and is missing out on office life? And we also asked you, who is concerned about returning to the office? And I've had a look at the results on the chat, and as expected, they're quite varied, quite mixed. And that's not surprising because we're all different. We all have different views, we all have different attitudes, and we all have different personalities. So I'd like to just talk about personality for a minute. Now, since the 1930s, psychologists have been trying to identify different personality types and reduce it to a manageable number. In the 1930s, Allport and Obert, they identified 18,000 different descriptors of personality. And since then, we've been reducing it down. Eysenck came up with just 2 scales of personality traits. The first one is extroversion, introversion. Extroverts, more social animals, like the company of others, thrill seekers, risk takers. Compared to introverts, they tend to prefer their own company, think things through, mull things over, tend to be a little bit less overtly sociable. It doesn't mean they're antisocial, it just means they like their own company. And then we have the neurotic versus emotionally stable scale. Now, I don't like the phrase neurotic, but basically it means people who are a little bit nervous, a bit apprehensive, dwell on things, fear the future, dwell on the past, compared to their emotionally stable colleagues who are basically a little bit more carefree. And what that theory suggests, when we look back at the questions I asked you, is that the introverts, they're the people who are loving working from home. They love working without distractions, and they love working without being interrupted by their overly social colleagues. Whereas the extroverts, who are seeking social interaction, they're the ones who are already on phone calls, they are already on Teams meetings, they may be already meeting people in person. They're the ones that can't wait to get back to the office. And then how about the people who fear going back? Well, that tends to be our more neurotic, nervous people. They're the ones who have the biggest concerns about returning to the office. The point here is that we're all different and we've all got those different views. And the first thing I would ask is when you return to the office, just be cognizant that it's not just how you feel, it's how the people around you also feel. Make their life easy as well as your own. Let me drive into a little bit more psychological theory. I'm a psychologist, I just love psychology, and we just need to get the screen back up. I love psychology and I like to share it with people. But let's start with some classic psychology, which is the Yerkes-Dodson inverted U-shaped curve. And this curve applies to many, many different situations. But basically, it first was used to describe how our performance relates to our level of arousal. Now, don't get excited about the term level of arousal. That just means our level of mental stimulation. And basically, when our mental stimulation is at its optimum, then obviously our performance is at its optimum. If we're overly mentally stimulated, that can lead to stress and it degrades our performance. If we're understimulated, then that can lead to lethargy, fatigue, and obviously we underperform. And the interesting thing here is that extroverts have an innate low level of arousal, so they constantly seek stimulation. And introverts have a high level of arousal, so they're always looking for calming environments. Now that curve, as I said, applies to many situations, but it also applies to Altman's privacy model. Now what Altman said, compared to how we normally talk about privacy, what Altman said is we're looking for a level of interaction. And when that level of interaction meets the interaction we receive, that's our optimum level of privacy. So it's all about matching what you desire to what you receive. If we have too much interaction, that leads to a feeling of overcrowding and again degrades our performance. If we have too little interaction, that leads to feelings of social isolation, and again degrades our performance. So how does that apply to the home? Well, to borrow a term, I think it's about extending the curve, flattening the curve, because it's all about how do we ensure that people are performing to their optimum and not feeling isolated. And I think that technology is indeed helping with that. We can at least see each other, we can talk to each other, we can stay connected even when we're physically isolating. Long gone are the days where we're on the end of a telephone listening into a call and didn't have a clue what was happening. But it's all about staying connected through technology. And as I said, our personality also affects that. And that is why introverts are possibly coping more with being at home than their extroverted colleagues. So let's have a look at some more data. This was a survey conducted very recently in America by an architectural practice called Gensler, a big major architectural practice. And they asked people about what do they feel about returning to the office and how many days would they work in the office. And I really found these results surprising to some extent. 12% of people said they would like to continue to work from home for 5 days a week. I suspect they're the introverts amongst us. Nearly a half of people said, I want to go back to the office 5 days a week. Now, that's really surprised me under the current circumstances, but maybe they're the extremely extroverted. And then another 50 or so percent said, actually, it's more likely that I'm going to return to the office for 2 or 3 days a week and stay at home 2 or 3 days a week. And that's certainly what I've been hearing from my own clients. That's going to be the new norm going forward. Gensler then asked them, well, why do you want to return to the office? What are you missing out on? And you can see from this slide that more than 50% of people said it's about meeting with colleagues, it's about interacting, it's about those face-to-face meetings. 45% of them also said they were missing out on some key technology. So maybe we can help there. But on the whole, it was just about missing out on being with other people. So the theory, the psychological theory, and the data from that survey and other surveys, they've shown similar results, implies that agile working, smart working, flexible working, new ways of working, whatever you want to call it, it's been around for 20 years at least, that is finally going to be the new norm. And also because people are in and out of the office, then it means that blended or hybrid working is going to be the norm as well. And I think for me, the key is how do we make that blended working environment work for us when you've got people in and out of the office? How do we ensure that the people not physically present stay connected? And again, we can do that through technology and management techniques. For example, let's just consider the standard meeting room. It's already been referred to, but in the old days, we'd have all piled into the office and sat around a big meeting table. That's no longer the case, certainly in the short term. We're seeing fewer seats in meeting rooms, more social distancing, physical distancing. But what's happening, of course, is people are connecting into the meeting either by using Teams at home or even Teams in other parts of the office, in small focus booths or even at desks and so on. But as I said, the key is how do you make sure those people not physically present feel connected? I love the fact that we can use technology. You can see people, we're picking up on non-verbal language. That's very important. We didn't have that before. But also you can use simple techniques like just ask people questions, ask people to do short presentations. If you see someone nodding off, mention their name, they'll soon wake up. But just get people involved in these meetings. Also, people are starting to say, well, hold on, if I don't have to go into the office every day, what am I going back to the office for? And I think we are seeing this delineation between working at home to do focused work, concentrated work and so on, and then we're coming into the office to interact, to collaborate, to meet socially. So I think what we'll see is that a reduction in desks and increasing collaboration spaces, because that's what we're coming in for. And of course that's all aided by the agile working and the fact that only maybe 50% of us are in the office at any time anyway. And then of course the other thing is we do need to not just create an attractive and comfortable office, but one that also is healthy and safe for our colleagues. So let me talk about the health aspects a little bit. This is an old chart. I've presented this before at a Sharp meeting, and basically it's a meta-analysis of 24 different studies that compared performance in the office to fresh air ventilation rates. So as ventilation rates, as fresh air increases, our performance increases up to a certain extent. Now, sadly, it's quite common practice to recirculate stale air. This saves money and it saves energy. So we don't give people 100% fresh air, we recirculate air. I think that practice has got to stop going forward. It's dangerous, it's gonna cause problems with cross-infection. And one way to understand whether that's happening or not is to monitor CO2, carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a pollutant, and we, people, are the biggest pollutant, producer of carbon dioxide. So if we monitor carbon dioxide and we can reduce that to the levels we find outside, to fresh air levels, we know that we're flushing out pollutants and contaminants and that we're in a safe environment. I think another key factor is density, the way that we space plan our offices. Now, over the last 10 years, the British Council for Offices, they've done a study, they benchmark space, and what they found is that density has been increasing. Now, over 10 years, it only increased by 2 square meters per person. And whilst that doesn't sound a lot, that's the equivalent of losing 1 whole desk per person. And we know that in more recent years, people have been chasing 8 square meters per person. So that's like losing the equivalent of 2 desks of space per person. And that is achieved by reducing the desk size and the space between desks. I remember the days when I worked in an architectural practice and I had a 2-meter desk, 1 meter deep. That's easily 2 meters of social distancing. But these days, desks have been getting smaller and smaller in size. 1400 millimeters is the industry standard. I've worked with organizations that have been saying, let's reduce it to 1200 or 1000 millimeters. We're basically putting people too close. It's bad for noise and it's bad for health. So going forward, I think what we'll see in the short term, certainly, is that we'll be using every other desk. We might take chairs away or we might put them on some kind of rota. I think beyond that, we've got to go back to start thinking about density. Stop chasing density and think about health and safety. Let's maybe separate out those smaller desks, or even better, let's go back to having a larger desk. So really important to get the density right, and otherwise we're just going to be increasing the risk of cross-infection. Another key element, and something that can help with reducing cross-infection, is partitioning. Now, I'm not condoning returning to private offices or enclosed offices. I am a fan of the open plan working environment, but as I say, I think it's got too dense. And the other thing is it's got too open. I think the solution is a landscaped office. And what I mean by that is low density, but introduce some partitioning, not necessarily rooms, although we do need rooms occasionally, certainly meeting rooms, but also little high back seating areas, little collaboration pods, focus booths, a whole mixture of different work settings that will support this new way of working, this collaborative way of working. We can also break up the space using open shelving, planting. We can use hanging acoustic screens. Lots of ways just to break up the space and make it a little bit more landscaped, a little bit more fragmented. What I do urge you to do is not this. Please stop with the knee-jerk overreaction. No one wants to sit in a perspex box or be surrounded by shower curtains. the workplace not only has to be safe, but it has to be comfortable, attractive, and practical. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Very wise words, many insights, a breath of fresh air in the debate of the new normal. I certainly know that we are often asked to follow the science, and Nigel, as a scientist, a psychologist, I know we are in very good hands, very good information. Thank you very much. So thank you, Nigel. Thank you also, Michelle and Jason, also for your keynotes just a few moments ago. Highly appreciated. All excellent information, all helping us to make the adjustments in the new normal. And for all Nigel, Michelle and Jason, the work hasn't quite finished yet. We're coming to one of the highlights, which is the panel discussion. So we're all on the discussion here. And this is also a chance for you, the audience, to also come in and see whether you can engage in discussion and put your questions. So I think there was some information flashed up on the screen, and there is a Q&A panel which you can use, which you can bring up. And if you do that, please put in your question to the panel. Maybe you can put in your name, additionally company or country. Just gives us an idea of where to place you. We've got a set of moderators looking at that, and I hope that your question comes through and that we can place it to the panel. So we've got about 15, maybe 20 minutes with our panel here. Nigel, Michelle and Jason we already know, but we've got two new entrants. First of all, huge privilege to have Marin Corrigan, who's Associate Director of Marketing and Strategic Alliances with Sharp USA. Welcome on board, Marin.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for having me.
We have Mark Frost. Mark is the European Marketing Manager for IoT at Intel, based in the UK, but with a European remit. So welcome on board, Mark.
Thanks, Chris.
Excellent. So as questions start flowing in, that's good, but let me just start off maybe with one which I've just prepared just to get a warm up, and that is really for you, Marin, first, and that is, so what have you been missing most about home working? What do you miss about the office?
It's people. As great as this virtual platform is and seeing all your faces, I'm just looking forward to seeing people in person, that community feel, and obviously seeing my partners and traveling. I think, Chris, you were probably one of the last people I saw in person before we went into lockdown. You know, missing a lot of that spontaneous meeting and collaboration happening in person.
That's right. I remember it well. One of the last trips I did.
Right.
And what about you, Mark? Intel. I mean, have you been missing the Intel office or looking forward to something there?
Yeah, so Intel's been very cautious, actually. We've been out since March and we won't be going back to the office now until probably January time. And yeah, to sort of echo what Mira said, really, it's these platforms are great for talking. We're all communicating now, but it's the informal conversations, the ones in the corridor, in the canteen, is those little bits of extra communication that I'm kind of missing at the moment.
That's right. So in fact, Nigel, as a psychologist, when it comes to those informal engagements, I mean, what would you do? What any tips there?
Yeah, it's really important for people to stay connected, feel part of the organisation. So we have to create virtual ways of doing that. There's no reason why we can't have socials online. I'm sure some of you have been involved in the virtual bars and having a virtual drink or something to eat with your colleagues. And some of my clients, we've actually now started having our meetings at 4 p.m. and then at 5 p.m. we all switch over and have a little drink and have a natter. So we're actually mixing social and formal in the same space. But I think it's about creating those things, create events, create reasons for people to come online and have a chatter and allow time. Quite often, start the meeting 15 minutes earlier and just let people have a chat via the chat or even using the mics, but give people time to have those little conversations and catch up and have a natter. After the meeting's formally finished, leave it running. People can still have a chat.
Very good, Nigel. Actually, Michelle, maybe one for you, which is we have had a comment here, or maybe even a question here from Mary in Liverpool, and it concerns, let's say, fatigue, video conferencing fatigue. I've even heard it called Zoom fatigue. Perish the thought. So how could we get around, let's say, video conferencing fatigue? How can we lighten it up a bit?
I think if you ask the Microsoft guy, the first thing is switch to Teams. That's one. No, but in all seriousness, I think we might be coming to the end of the regular 9 to 5s. Right? So if we look at the data, we're actually seeing that Teams is being more used 2 hours earlier and 2 hours later, which doesn't necessarily mean that people are working more. What we're actually seeing is bigger gaps during the day. So I think it's super important that as a company or as an employer, you have to provide time for your employees to really manage them based on the output and not so much trying to control what they're doing from an hour-to-hour perspective. And I think then as an employee, you should feel less pressure of having to perform. What I've seen a lot in those first few weeks is people that just felt the constant pressure of just showing what they're doing and that they're actually being productive while they're being at home. I think now we're 3 to 4 months in, people are actually seeing, hey, I'm quite productive at home. They should allow themselves more breaks in between, have a walk, run some errands, and don't feel bad when your peer, manager, customer, partner calls you and you have to say, hey, I'm just getting a haircut or I'm just walking the dog or whatever you're doing. You should feel comfortable with that. So as an employer, make sure that people get time to refresh. And as an employee, do not feel that pressure of constantly having to perform between 9 and 5.
Very good, Michelle. I mean, Jason, you are a senior manager at Sharp. I mean, you've got a huge team underneath you. So, I mean, how have you dealt with fatigue with video conferencing and maintaining that productivity or achieving what you want to do?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think flexibility and understanding is important, and picking up on Michelle's point around effectively stretching the business day and actually breaking that business day up a bit as well, because also with parents of children, they've had the added burden of not just having the children at home and not school, but also the homeschooling that comes with that. So I think recognizing that it makes a big difference. I do a regular weekly team call at the beginning of the week, and it's not necessarily to talk about the business, it's just to talk about, hi, how you doing, how's your weekend, what have you got up to, and important things like that, because they are important, because they're the conversations you would have when you come into the office on a Monday morning. So that's really important. And then also the social online events that you try and do, and I think we had a bit of online karaoke as well at one point with the team, which was quite impressive. I think I needed a bit more to drink though. Anyway, so yeah, just doing those fun things really.
Very good, Jason.
This is a lovely.
Which I'd like to. Sorry, Nigel.
Yeah, there's a lovely bit of research called the Energy Project by Tony Schwartz, and he's found that if you work in blocks of 90 minutes with 60 minutes focused work and then a 20-30 minute break like Michelle and Jason just said, you actually are more productive at the end of the day, and you're refreshed and ready for the next day. You're not burned out.
I leave the best to the last. That's very good, Nigel. End of the day. Mark, I wanted to turn to you because I had a question here from Dieter. I'm assuming from Germany, but Dieter was really asking quite a big question. Could VR, virtual reality, also play a part in getting this hybrid, this new normal working more effectively?
It's interesting. I think VR has been around for a while, and there's been issues with it. I think people have used it. You get that kind of often get like a slightly weird lag sometimes, and people can feel a bit ill from using it. The systems are now much better. I think probably things like AR might be more appropriate, augmented reality, where you kind of see through, it just kind of overlays the image on top of what you're seeing. But again, honestly, from my personal view, I think it's quite niche. There's going to be certain workspaces, training environments where that technology will get adopted. I think for general day-to-day in the office, I can't honestly see it being adopted widely.
Very good. Actually, Marion, maybe you can continue that question. And also, there's Cameron from the UK that was also asking, have you had any disappointments with the technology since the lockdown or since remote home working?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've struggled with is bandwidth. I think you guys were on with us early in practice, and I can't get my boys off of games for more than 30 minutes at a time without feeling like I'm putting them in a jail cell. So I think we've all sort of become our own little AV experts at home, managing the Wi-Fi, figuring out our lighting and our cameras and our mics. And I think it goes back to a little bit about what Michelle said early on, is to have a good collaborative meeting, you know, you have to be inclusive. You need to be able to hear people and see people to gauge those reactions. So I think we've all gotten a greater appreciation for technology and what it's allowed us to do in this time. That's really, you know, I'm excited about the world of collaboration and the fact that people are using video more often. I can't imagine what this last 3 or 4 months would have been like had we not had this platform. So I'm excited about that. I think we've learned a lot to improve things along the way. And I think, as Mark said, I think AR is exciting and VR is exciting. I think people are opening their minds up to new possibilities. And I think innovation is really what's happening. I called it a technology renaissance in a way, because I think there's definitely been rapid change in the last 4 months that's beyond exciting to me.
That is very exciting indeed. We heard many new things coming through from Michelle, which was good. Nigel, I've got one coming through now, which question, which very exciting one, very interesting, right up your street, I think. I hope it's going to be good. It's anonymous. It's from the UK, and it's from the salesman point of view. You know, cold calling and distancing are not what you want as a salesman. So any tips or any suggestions as to how a salesman can get more, or salesperson can get more comfortable in this new environment?
That's an interesting one, because when he said it, I immediately started thinking about marketing and the difference between inbound marketing and outbound marketing, and sales is a bit outbound, and how do you convert that to inbound? So I think there's an opportunity under COVID to use social media, use your connections to get to know people better, maybe to start producing material that people are interested in, so they start coming to you, just like we're doing here today, rather than the kind of cold calling. It's a funny one for me, because I thought we've passed cold calling and now it's all about relationships. So I know that's not a very psychological answer, but with my other business marketing development hat on, that's certainly what I've been doing over the last 10 years. Does that help?
just to maybe add to that, it is an interesting question, and as I said earlier, customers are more reluctant now to have people from other companies visiting their premises, and therefore, you know, the traditional sales approach is, you know, making that phone call maybe, or getting an invitation, you come and visit the premises. So we're experimenting in our Nordic region, actually, whereby we get the initial contact with the customer, maybe they've visited our website, and a sales appointment is made, but that first appointment is actually a video conference call. So, you know, the person doesn't kind of rock up in the car or whatever, actually it's a video appointment, but now actually that's a very different type of medium as opposed to the traditional way of doing it. So what we're now having to do is to help skill up our salespeople in holding a video conference based opening sales call. And you know, there's a load of science. It's not a long call. It's got to be quite short and sharp to the point. Maybe some of the small talk that you would normally have has to be different now. And then ultimately that will lead maybe to a physical visit. But it's a different approach, and actually it's more efficient for the customer because it is a shorter call. It's more efficient for us, and therefore it allows us maybe to more quickly qualify out opportunities. And not waste as much time as you normally would travelling around and things. So it's going to be quite an interesting experiment, but I've got some quite high hopes for that, actually.
Thank you, Jason. I've got a question here, probably particularly relevant for Michelle and Mark. Maybe Michelle first. It comes from Peter, New Jersey, USA. So one of yours, Miriam. And Peter is asking, you know, how do you deal with the different time zones? You know, we've got the European time zones, and US wakes up a bit later, and you know, if you're not careful, you are having long days every day, and you know, there must be fatigue implications there. So Michelle, how do you deal with that?
I think it's a great question, and I don't think I deal with it any different than I did pre-COVID. Again, going back to my earlier points, if you can determine yourself when you work, right, you can really arrange your day in a way that works best for you. And so my rule in the house, once summer break is over, or when the kids are not on vacation and don't have their vacations, I take my daughter to school every single day. right? That's a rule in the house. So I don't do any meetings before, let's say, 9:15 or 9:30. If I know that I'm on a late call in different time zones, so let's say I'm calling the Jersey and there's a 6-hour time difference here, and I know that I'm going to be late on a call. I think the most important thing in the house is communicate. Right? It's not so much about work-life balance; it's more about work-life harmony and really communicate in the household. And then also during the day, be conscious of how many hours you're actually going to be working. So if I know that I'm going to be on a long call, we just wrapped up our fiscal year, heading into the new fiscal year with quite a lot of kickoffs that are being hosted from our HQ in Redmond. I know that I'm going to be on a lot of late calls. So that means I'm arranging my day in a different way. So I'm not working during the morning, sleeping in, spending time with the kids, and then I spend more time later in the afternoon. So again, I think it goes back to about really critically looking at your day and seeing when do I work and when do I actually take time to refresh. And I think technology obviously helps a great deal into connecting with people from all over the world.
That's right. Thanks, Michelle. And Mark, I suppose similar approach.
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult. My team's not only in Europe, but I report into China and the US. So we have early morning, end of the day, and an evening. And the only way I deal with it is to follow your kind of body's natural rhythm. A bit like Michelle says, I work terribly in the afternoons. So actually, I like to have, I'll take a couple of hours off in the afternoon, like between 1 and 3, something like that. I just don't do any work at all, and then that kind of helps give you a bit of a pause. Otherwise, you just go crazy.
Very good. Marion, we're coming to the market with workspaces. We've got the Windows collaboration display with IoT. So, I mean, do you think with the new norm and COVID that IoT as a proposition will accelerate?
Absolutely. I think even prior to COVID, people had an interest in IoT, but I think COVID's really brought a greater attention to obviously wanting a clean workspace, looking at things like air quality and oxygen levels and CO2 levels. I think that's important, but I think just in a way, we all appreciate certainty that data brings us and being able to make smarter decisions when you have data to give you a background on that. So I think definitely within the IoT sensor, it's going to give you a greater understanding for how technology is being used. It's definitely more accepted. And in a way, I think Synapse Workspaces is a great door opener to that conversation. A lot of people are looking for an IoT strategy, but aren't really sure how to at this point in time. So for me, I think it's just a great way to start thinking about IoT and analytics.
Nigel, maybe it's a bit of a techie thing, but nonetheless, within the working space, there are a lot of things you could be measuring. You understand our Windows collaboration display. Are we measuring the right things? What else could we also be measuring to make our workplace more attractive, more effective?
Yeah, as I said in my presentation, I think you're on something with the CO2 monitoring, because if we know that we've got good fresh air, that is going to help reduce pollutants and so on. Daylight is also expensive, not also useful in terms of just you've talked. Mark was talking earlier about the kind of circadian rhythms and so on. So daylight's really important to us. It keeps us alert. It helps us sleep at night. So when we're thinking about the broader picture around health, look at daylight, look at CO2. I like the occupancy sensors as well. Maybe we can start to look at density. I mentioned how important it is to keep distancing, physical distancing. Can we use occupancy sensors to start to monitor when we are getting too much on top of each other? Maybe we use thermal imaging to look at that as well. So yeah, it's definitely got its place, IoT, and I think it can only help with creating healthy working environments going forward.
I think also, if I may add, I think also in headsets, right? So the stuff that Logitech and Jabra are doing is they're putting quite a lot of IoT in their headsets. You can see how often they're being used, how noisy is the environment that people are in. And you can pull a lot of data from that. And then I think if you combine it with the data that's coming from things such as the graph or whatever's coming from the collaboration display, I think that becomes very valuable over the next year.
Yeah. And Mark, as the IoT expert in the sense, is COVID an accelerator or inhibitor for IoT?
I think you have to be careful. I think there's an awful lot of gimmicky IoT solutions around, and I think as a kind of geeky person, I've always found it really interesting looking at graphs and data coming from little sensors. It's like really fascinating. But you know, you've got to think. You buy perhaps some inexpensive sensors for your building, and then you build a whole platform around that yourself, and then some of these sensors start failing, and then your whole strategy falls apart. So my only advice would be buy a validated platform, buy a platform like the platform you guys are offering, where you know it's certified with Teams and on your data analytic package, so you know it's all going to work together and you're not going to have any issues.
Excellent, lovely. Well, I'm afraid I think time is up, and this has proved to me anyway that when it comes to digital technology, this is not gimmicky. It's been a really good panel discussion. I really appreciate all your words of wisdom and all the experience pouring through. Thank you ever so much for joining us. I'm sure the audience have appreciated also all the points. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Cool. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone.
So at this point, I will quickly swap inputs. We have a final wrap-up presentation, so let me see if I can do that smoothly. Okay, so hopefully sound is still working, and hopefully you can see a presentation from my side. So we've got a couple of more minutes just to wrap up, and that is really to look at the solutions which Sharp is coming or has come to the market for the new normal, for hybrid working. You might have heard it mentioned a couple of times in the last hour, and that is our Windows collaboration display. So from our point of view, this is perfect for the hybrid working. It's good for in the office and for linking people in remote locations, working from home. Easy connections, great seamless experience with Microsoft 365, with the Skype for Business certification. We have great audio and video. And then we mentioned Synapse WorkSpaces, where we have the ability to work with smarter workspaces. So Windows Collaboration Display certainly fits in to the new normal. Maybe just a couple of moments on the IoT and the smart elements here from the Windows Collaboration Display. And that is, we have this sensor block. It's measuring occupancy, temperature, relative humidity, air quality, ambient light. A lot of things about the environment which, you know, influence your productivity and effectiveness at collaboration. And, you know, we heard from Nigel about the importance of CO2, and that is at the heart of the ambient air quality sensor. So very much in line with making sure offices today are safe and predictable and good for working. So we have the IoT data available with our Synapse WorkSpaces service, and this is like a new step, a little bit of a new step for Sharp. Jason, right at the start, talked about the importance or the interest, let's say, of services rather than products and bought solutions. And the point is, you know, with the service is you pay for what you use as you use it, and not you have to use the whole thing just because you bought it. You know, if you buy that heap of spaghetti because it's on special offer, do you really want to eat it all? I'm not sure. As a service, you get to choose. Secondly, with a service, you're looking at the outcomes and not the specifications. So you're not so clearly aware of the technology making things happen. You're not having to define the specifications for what's going on. You're looking to see what the end result is. Why have I bought that technology? So it's very much a shift of focus away from the technology to the outcome. And finally, third important point, particularly in today's world of, let's say, business difficulties and COVID, you're moving your cash flow to operating expenditure and less from the capital expenditure, less intensive use of your capital assets, and you're freeing up cash flow. So 3 very good reasons why services are more likely to help you in your business and help you with your solutions. So services very much a way forward. So we're offering Synapse WorkSpaces as a service. It's offering a chance for enhanced room utilization. We measure what's going on in the room, how many people are there, and what the booking status is. So we make sure rooms are being used well. We're looking at comfort too. We measure the temperature, the humidity, the CO2, and we can give you a chance to optimize comfort so that in the end you have better collaboration and a better group working. So Synapse WorkSpaces has many benefits. It will pay for itself pretty quickly. It's available to market very soon in the next 1, maybe 2 months. Please contact us. We'd love to tell you more about Synapse WorkSpaces. So with that, looks to be on the dot. at the top of the hour. It's been a great pleasure to have you joining with us at this Sharp Microsoft Connected event today. It's been very informative for me today. The keynotes were great and the panel discussion very lively, very informative. Really appreciate that. Thank you very much for joining, and I'm sure we'll have another Sharp Microsoft Connected event sometime in the future. I look forward to welcoming you then. All the best. Goodbye.